So in recent years, From Software has been on quite a roll with their Souls games, whether that's the Dark Souls trilogy, or Bloodborne, or Elden Ring, or Demon Souls, or Sekiro. All of these games are Game of the Year caliber games. They're high quality, highly regarded games, and well, they weren't what the company was originally known for, because the company originally was known for making the Armored Core franchise back in the day. And they finally decided, after however many years, to go back and make a new one. And that's how we got Armored Core 6, Fires of Rubicon, which released back in August of this year. I did pre order it, and I've been playing it since the day it came out. And I just finally felt like I played enough of it to comfortably make a review. Meaning that I am almost done with my second playthrough on New Game Plus. And I've got quite a bit to say about this game. Obviously, right off the bat, it's very different from what we're used to from these guys. And I think that that's a huge benefit to it in this situation. So I don't want to talk about too much before we get to our intro. So with all that being said, thank you guys for watching today's video. My name is Doug, and if you are new here, and if you enjoy, I would really appreciate it if you smack that like button and subscribed. And without any further ado after that, guys, let's just go ahead and hop right into things. So usually I go ahead and start my reviews with games that have stories, with my thoughts on the story, and I suppose we'll go ahead and do that here, though I do want to emphasize that that's not really the focus point of this game. That would, of course, be the gameplay. However, for the sake of the story in this game, I think that while not being the focus, I feel like it's actually a pretty solid story. It was maybe a little hard to follow at times. I think that was probably just kind of on me. I don't know. It doesn't really feel like it was a super complicated story, but um, the story, you are a mercenary hired to kind of come to this planet, and for the vast majority of the game, you're just kind of taking on missions for the different corporations that are here on the planet before things very much spiral and devolve. And then by the time the last little act of the game comes around, things are not exactly where they started off. And the game has multiple endings, as well as a true like secret ending that you unlock on New Game Plus. I think two, which I haven't unlocked yet for clarification purposes. But I gotta say, I really enjoy the story and the different characters involved for being a game where you never actually see any of the main characters. You can get pretty attached to them, all things considered, just based on some really good voice acting and well written, people all around. You of course have your main character who is unnamed, who kind of works for somebody named Walter, who has some friends like Carla, and then of course the fan favorite and my personal favorite as well, Rusty, are some of the characters you'll meet along the way, as well as just the different leaders of the different factions. And I mean, all around, a lot of the characters in this game are kind of a-holes, but it's as far as the characters go, they're very much not the important piece of the story for the most part, because your character just kind of does what he wants anyways, and the story very much is impacted by the decisions you make by the end. Especially, like I mentioned, there's different endings, and it can play out in all sorts of different ways based on the decisions that you decide to make. Um, there is also, as you play through the game, I do know this, even if I have not fully experienced it yet. As new game pluses roll around, you unlock new story missions, and so, for example, when you play through the game the first time around, you have however many missions, and there's some choice-based ones, so you don't actually play all of them. Your second playthrough, it adds some levels, and I would also recommend making the other choices to unlock the other ending. But then on a New Game Plus 2 or third playthrough, you would, of course, unlock the most extra missions there, and the rest of the extra missions, and get the secret true ending, which I cannot emphasize enough I do not have yet. Um, but that's going to do it for story, because really, again, that's not the focus point of this game. I think it's serviceable, and I think that for what it is, it's a good story, but it's not a game that I would ever think to recommend to somebody because the campaign is, the story is a standout. I would recommend this game, and I am recommending this game because of how fun the gameplay is. And that is truly the strong point of this game. And that's also where the biggest difference comes in. If you're somebody who, like me, had just played the Souls games coming into this, this is nothing like that. And I think that it kind of benefits from that, because, I mean, it doesn't really subvert expectations in the sense that, like, you can tell by looking at it that it's nothing like those. But It is very different, and it's really enjoyable, and just kind of, something I'd like to see them do more of. I'd like to see more Armored Core games, but also just maybe more games that are this, fast paced from them in the future, this style, because I gotta say it's really enjoyable. It's very fast paced, and it's very customizable. You of course have your Armored Core, which is a giant mech that you pilot around, and you go around killing other mechs, other Armored Cores, and the big kind of focus on this is customization. So for most of the gameplay that you'll see in this video, which is taken from the like first half of the first act of the game, um, you will see that my mech is pretty straightforward with, typical robot build. However, as the game goes on, and as the game went on, especially for me, you really can customize it and make this into whatever you want. So there's different times where you can use like spider legs, which help amplify your ability and maneuverability in the air. I found a lot of use out of the tank treads, which are pretty much just slow, beefy. You have a lot of health, but you take a lot of damage because you can't dodge much. There's a lot of variety here. You of course have different weapons that you can use, whether that's you want to use the plasma sword or pulse weapons, or maybe you want to use a shotgun or a sniper. You have all sorts of options at your disposal, and can really, especially as the game goes on and you get further along, you can unlock pretty much all of these and just really go all out on the customization. You can find in certain levels that a certain boss or certain enemies might be really difficult, and all you need to do is just quickly go change what your guy looks like and change everything up, and well, voila, suddenly it becomes super easy, or at least in comparison, super easy. And that's something else I wanted to touch on with the gameplay, which is the difficulty. From Software games are kind of notoriously known for being really, really difficult. Obviously, if you've ever played like Dark Souls or Elden Ring, again, like these games are all known for having some of the hardest bosses in video games, for being some of the hardest games in recent history. Um, and I gotta say, I think this is an unpopular opinion with this game based on what I've seen, but in my experience, this game is not that hard. Now it's again fully customizable based, and if you're used to the other From Software games, that's a huge learning curve, sure. But if you come into this as a fast-paced, you're constantly dashing around and locking onto enemies and just guns blazing. If you're coming into this expecting that, it's basically just that. It's kind of straightforward as far as difficulty goes. I mean, it's never an easy game, and I did struggle at certain times, but it's really just not as hard as other From Software games have kind of led me to be used to. What it's not what I'm accustomed to from them, and I think that that's a good thing because it did help the enjoyability of this game quite a bit. I think, in my opinion, um, I did find that while certain levels might be particularly easy, it was usually still a step up. Like the boss fights would test you, um, and it could also be I would say that the first act of this game is intentionally easy to kind of help you warm into things before it really unleashes the floodgates with a really hard boss at the end of the chapter, and then it goes from there. I do feel like it ramps up in difficulty a little bit at that point, but I still feel like the game just never really was that difficult for the most part. It wasn't easy, but I wouldn't say that this game was hard by any stretch. There were a couple of really hard bosses, like I mentioned, sure, obviously, but I do also point to the fact that I was able to discover through customization an incredibly overpowered build that I fully admit I took advantage of for the majority of the game. I unlocked it roughly, I want to say, at the beginning of Act 4, if not near the end of Act 3, and I think that sounds more correct. And I'm still using it now over a full playthrough later. I've never needed to switch off of it. It's just an incredibly overpowered build, and maybe that plays a role in the game being easier. Maybe, that's why my experience has been the way it was. But even before I unlocked that build, I didn't really find the game to be particularly difficult. And I did want to touch on the bosses, because the bosses are incredibly awesome in this game. You have, the occasional Armored Core one-on-one, mech-on-mech fights, but there's also a boss really early on called the Strider that really stands out. I really wanted to talk about. It's the one that you're seeing right now, actually, in this clip. This giant thing that I'm flying around and fighting is not the map, that is actually the boss. And it's actually crazy how big the scale of this thing is. Um, But again, there's also different bosses of all sizes and implications, and it's really cool. There's also one at the end of Act Three's boss, I believe, if I recall correctly, is really huge and really cool, and then the boss at the end of Act Four is also not that one's more of a regular sized mech on mech, but still an incredibly fun fight. And then moving on from the gameplay, of course, want to touch on some other things as well. I thought that the controls were really good to this game. They were at times maybe a bit complicated, but I think that the controls are not like complicated. Is the wrong word to use here, I suppose. The controls aren't complicated. It's just you are maneuvering around in a giant mech, and at times, the environment can go against the build that you're using, or in my case, the one that I was using for the majority of the game. Um, Maybe it adds to the difficulty a little bit at times, but I feel like the controls are nothing to complain about. It's just you have a lot going on at all times, and sometimes, you know, the gameplay can kind of reflect that. Also worth noting is the graphics, which I feel like were constantly kind of a standout for me. I really liked the designs in a lot of the different armored cores and just enemies in general, but also the environments themselves and just the graphics were really good in my opinion. Especially, From Software is not usually, don't get me wrong, the graphics are never bad, but they're never the selling point for their games like some other game franchises can be. And I just feel like this was a really good test of their skill when it comes to the graphics. Um, and then just in general, like the sound design, I have like the game's just really good all around. You can tell that these are a lot of veteran developers and a lot of these people know what they're doing when they're making this game. And I just gotta say, I'm really highly impressed overall. It's definitely not a perfect game though. Like I mentioned, the controls are serviceable and good, but maybe at times a little janky in the environments. I did feel like the game's story, while not being the focus point, still could have maybe been a little better, even if it is good for what it is. And in general, I don't have any like major complaints with this game. I just feel like it might at times be lacking something, and I can't quite figure out what that is, which I know is kind of a lame cop out. But truthfully, I really enjoy the game, even if it's not perfect. The gameplay is enjoyable, story is there. Um, and just all around good things. So I'm gonna go ahead and give Armored Core, as far as my review score, I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10. Admittedly, it's very close to an 8.5, so it's like a light 9, but I enjoyed it, and I think that most people would as well. So with that being said, guys, thank you for watching today's video. If you're new here, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I hope to see you guys back in my next review, which should be a nice and special one for us. So, without any further ado, guys, thanks again for watching, and hope to see you guys in the next one.